Hello, writers, and welcome back to Spooky Writes. My name's Kemal Onor, and on today's episode, I'm going to be talking all about underwriting versus overwriting. So, let's head into the storm. Okay, writes. So in this video, I'm going to give you tips and tricks on how to identify overwriting, how to identify underwriting. I'm also going to give you tricks on how to fix this problem with your writing, because you shouldn't be overwriting or underwriting your scenes in any of your writing. And it takes, again, writing is a skill, and I've touched on this issue a little bit in one of my early videos where I talked about purple versus beige prose, and that video will be linked right here, right there. So overwriting is when we tend to we'll just write too much detail in a scene, and it often will lead to being very listy in its approach. It'll kind of go something like, he did this, he did that, he then did this other thing. And so overwriting, you need to understand that readers are not dumb. Readers are intelligent people, and readers know what's going on. So there's no need to add extra filler in your scenes. If a character is getting into a car, as I will provide an example a little bit later on, I have an example of overwriting as well as underwriting. So make sure you stay through this whole video, and while you're at it, make sure to hit like, subscribe, give this video a good thumbs up. It helps out the channel grow. So overwriting is one of those things that early on you might feel that you need to give every minute detail that is going on. You might need to explain everything to the nth degree. And this is something that you need to avoid. And often if you're overwriting, you'll see a lot of commas in your writing. It'll be very listy again. It'll go, he walked into the room, comma, he looked around, comma, his heart was beating in his chest, comma, he could smell something strange, comma, blah, 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 whatever your scene is, it's going to be very listy. It's going to be one thing after the other, and you want to try and avoid this as much as possible. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have what's called underwriting. Underwriting is when scenes might not be fully developed, and this is when you might be skimping on the details, and often this underwriting will typically come from writers who are overeager to get through a scene, who feel that they need to just write a scene to get to the part that they're inspired to write. And so a great way to combat underwriting is letting your scenes breathe, is taking a moment to understand that just because you're not inspired to write this scene, it still needs to happen. It still needs to be that scene that's going to bridge the gap between where you are right now and where you are in terms of your thought process, in terms of your planning. And so very much looking at your scenes and allowing them the opportunity to breathe, allowing them the opportunity to be fully grown. And so if you feel like you're underwriting your scenes, a great way to combat underwriting is to slow down, is to slow the pace of your story, slow the pace of your novel down a little bit, and let the scene breathe a little bit more. Don't be in such a rush to get to those scenes that you're like, I'm so inspired to reach this scene. By all means, write the scene that you're inspired to write, but then go back and write the scene that you're not inspired to write. Because writing is a skill that you have to write whether you're inspired or not. And the old joke is if you wait for inspiration to write, you're not a writer, you're a waiter. So now let's try and get into some examples of what overwriting might look like. And I'm gonna just put put something on the screen while I read, because I don't want you guys to be looking at my face while I'm reading this prompt. So, scene change. So for overwritten, he reached for the door, grabbed the handle, opened it, and got into the car. His feet rested on the pedals but applied no pressure. He took the keys from his pocket and after sticking them in the starter, turned them. He put his seatbelt on and adjusted his mirrors. The engine sputtered with a roar and the car started. Next, he let up on the emergency brake and eased on the clutch. He put it in drive, shifted, and the car moved forward at a slow pace. He made sure to check his mirrors and glanced in the rear view. Gradually, he increased his pressure on the pedals, and the car continued to increase its velocity along the road. He was now driving. So in that example of overwriting, there's so many details that don't belong. There's so many details that a reader is naturally going to fill in with his or her own mind. You don't need to be giving a step-by-step detail of a character opening a car door, getting inside, doing everything, turning the car on, and it's unnecessary filler. Readers are going to naturally they're going to naturally understand the way that a car operates. They're going to naturally understand that if you push down a little bit more on the accelerator, the car is going to move faster. So overwriting, you're adding filler, you're adding words that don't really need to be there, and detail and description that readers are going to naturally pick up on. You don't need to tell a reader the step-by-step beats that are occurring as a character gets into the car. Obviously, the character is going to get into the car. They're going to obviously put their seatbelt on. They're obviously going to release the emergency brake. Otherwise, they're not going anywhere. And so this is needless information that readers are going to gloss over. It's going to bog your writing down, and readers don't want to be bogged down. Readers want to be lost in the fictive dream. Readers want to be immersed, but not overly immersed, not bombarded with filler description. And none of that description adds anything to the scene. So you have to be very choosy with what you are adding. And this is another great tactic, is go back and read your writing and make sure that every sentence counts, because specifically if you're writing short stories, if you're writing flash fiction, you have to pay such close detail and attention. You have to pay such close attention to, is every scene moving the story forward? Is there anything that can be cut here? Because you want to have consistent, concise stories where there aren't going to be big, long paragraphs detailing a character's behavior as he or she walks and opens the car door and gets inside and starts to drive away. So on the other end of this spectrum, we're going to have underwriting. Now, here's another example of that. So scene change. He was in the car driving. So on the opposite end of that spectrum of going from overwritten to underwritten works, we're losing so much of the detail in just saying that he was in the car driving. So again, we're being very terse. We're being overly terse in our language, and there's no emotion. There's no details that a reader is going to find very interesting in terms of what is going on in the scene. So again, that's my example of something mundane being underwritten. And again, I've touched on this in my idea of purple versus beige prose. And in that video, I talk about the idea that overly descriptive language can bog down a reader, and you don't want to bog down a reader. You don't want to skimp on the details. You want to be giving clear, concise descriptions and details that add to the scene, that are going to immerse the reader in the story, that's going to immerse the reader in the action going on. So here is my example of the best way to write this exact same scene of a character getting into a car and driving away. So here we are, scene wipe. Something worried him. He knew he had to leave that night. A fear spiked in his stomach. He went to the car, his shoulders slumped, defeated. He knew leaving would mean giving up. It couldn't be helped, though. There was nothing he or anyone else could do. He got in the car and drove away, leaving the cold, empty house with its haunted memories behind. So in this final example, I've given you so much more detail about the character, so much more emotion is evoked in this example, because we now have subtle details that, again, are not overly bogged down with excessive description, with excessive writing. We're presenting the scene in a way that gives detail to key attributes. We see that this character is defeated by the way his shoulders are slumped, and he just gets into the car and drives away, and we can have him thinking about the house, the haunted house that he's leaving. And perhaps this is how the story ends, or perhaps it's how a story begins, and thinking about what is the reader able to, when considering overwriting versus underwriting, you want to be considering what is the reader automatically going to know? What is the reader going to instinctively fill in the writing between the action? What is the reader going to pick up on? And so in the overly written category, you're giving too much detail and you're not trusting the reader enough. You need to be able to trust your audience. You need to be able to trust your readers to be able to pick up on small, subtle details, and you don't have to club them over the head with excessive language, with excessive writing, just to try and fill words. Again, you want to be making sure that all your language is concise, it's clear, and that each line, every word in a short story needs to matter. Otherwise, there's no need for it to be there. So make sure that you are writing clear, concise stories. Make sure that you are writing to the best of your ability. And the more that you write, the stronger your language will get. And gradually you'll start to write more, you'll start to understand. And especially the more reading you do, that when you read, pay close attention to things that, in the way that writers and authors present details, and what he or she might omit from a scene, what he or she might pick up on and describe in detail. And again, readers don't need to be clubbed over the head with every minute detail. Even if you're writing for young adults, even if you're writing for a young audience, you don't need to be clubbing your readers over the head with excessive detail. There are plenty of YA authors out there who, instead of treating their audience like they are children or young adults, instead these YA authors will lift their readers up and present them with words and situations that force the reader to have to look up a word, or perhaps force that reader to stretch their imagination a little bit more. So hopefully you found all that useful. Again, if you like this kind of content, make sure to hit like, subscribe, make sure to leave a comment below. Do you commonly overwrite your stories? Do you commonly underwrite your stories? And which do you feel is easiest to fix? I think they're both equally difficult to fix, and I think overwriting, you can definitely edit and trim the fat, so to speak. But that's going to be the video. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, keep it spooky. And then, of course, here's your writing prompt for sticking all the way to the end. He left the house and blank. So set your timer and start writing. Thank you so much. Yeah.